guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is the case of Susan Smith, who was a mother of two that claimed that her children had been abducted, when in fact the truth was much darker. Just to let you guys know, if anyone's interested, I have set up a Patreon account so anyone can support me over there if they wish to. I just like to let you know, I mean no disrespect to anyone that I talk about today. I've just got the information off the internet and compiled it into a video for educational purposes. Susan Lee Smith was born on the 26th of September in 1971 in Union, South Carolina in the US, to parents Linda Sue Harrison and Harry Ray Vaughn. Susan had a pretty tough time growing up. At the age of just 6 years old, her father committed suicide. And when Susan herself reached the age of 13, she also attempted suicide on her life. Now, losing her father at such a young age must have been so difficult, and it obviously had a huge impact on her life. Her mother did remarry a man called Beverly Russell, and this man actually went on to molest her. From the age of 15 up until 3 months before this case actually happened, he was still molesting her, and he did actually admit to that too. Susan graduated from school in 1989, and she ended up getting into a relationship with a married man. Now eventually this married man did end the relationship, and that would result in Susan's second suicide attempt. She was hospitalized for a stint due to her suicide attempts, and then eventually she went on to meet a man called David Smith, who she married in 1991. David and Susan ended up having 2 children together, 2 sons. Michael Daniel was born in 1991 and Alexander Tyler was born in 1993. Now let me just say, their relationship wasn't really great. They both accused each other of being unfaithful on so many occasions, and they did end up kind of separating multiple times and then getting back together, but eventually they did separate for good and they got a divorce. Susan lived in this tiny little town where kind of everyone knows your business and everyone seemingly knows each other, and it was a very religious town. It was a very quiet town, and nothing much really went on there. On the 25th of October in 1994, Susan left her work where she worked as a secretary, and she was really upset. She had a boyfriend called Tom Findlay, and he had just broken up with her. He was actually the son of the owner of the company that she worked for. He was wealthy and he lived in a mansion, and he was kind of an eligible bachelor that people were attracted to, and she was really upset over it all. So anyway, she leaves work and she goes to pick up her 2 sons from daycare. At the time, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex. She did pick up her sons, but she kind of found herself really distracted, and she said she just couldn't concentrate on the road, so she pulls over in a tavern parking lot and just rests for a little bit, tries to get her head on straight and refocus on what she was doing. While she's there, she makes a phone call to one of her friends. I don't really know what this conversation was about. I assume it was probably about Tom, because he literally just split with her, and so she was upset, and surely that would have been a topic of their conversation, but I don't know. She then went on to drive back to the office. She wanted to rekindle it, she wanted to get back together with him, but he pretty much told her to leave. It wasn't actually until 6 p.m. that she returned home after she had left work, and she left work at 3, so this is now 3 hours later. So she spent 3 hours with her 2 young sons in the back, either trying to get Tom back or in the parking lot, or I don't know. Regardless, she went in, she made her boys some pizza, and then she got on the phone to her friend who worked at the tavern to ask if Tom was in there, which she replied that he was. She then asked if Tom had been talking about her in any way, and she replied that he hadn't mentioned her name all night. Between 7:30 and 8 p.m, Susan packs up the boys in the car, she straps them in the child seats, and she said that she was going for a drive in the countryside. It had been a very stressful day, she wanted to clear her head, and I get it, you know, sometimes I do that. Sometimes a drive can be really good for you to de-stress and just chill out a bit. She stops off at a Walmart and picked up a few bits and bobs and then set off to a friend's house, which she would never arrive at. According to Susan's story, she stopped at some traffic lights when an African-American man broke into her car holding a gun. She claimed that he said, "Drive or I'll kill you." So she did. She was terrified. You know, she had a gun pointed to her. Who wouldn't? She said that they drove east, and all the time the gun was pointed in her ribs. Her sons in the back were crying. Obviously, they were frightened, they were upset. After around 10 minutes, they pulled into this lane which led to the lake. He stopped at the lake and then told Susan to get out. She apparently begged for her kids, you know, begged for him to let them go with her, or, you know, she just wanted to get her sons out of there. But he just ignored her and drove away with her 2 sons in the back seat. She ran to the closest house she could, and crying, hysterical, they called 911.
Did he have any weapons, gun, anything?
He's got a gun.
Got a gun.
Yes, ma'am.
Within minutes, the sheriff and the FBI were there. The sheriff informed the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, which is also known as SLED, and these were a highly trained investigation unit. They had all the latest technology, they had search dogs, they had all this equipment, and they were just the ones that you would want on your missing child's case, because they were very, very good at it and very highly trained. They informed her ex-husband David, who obviously dropped everything and just drove straight there. When he got there, he said Susan was absolutely hysterical. He literally had to pick her up off the floor himself and carry her to the next room, where he just cradled her, and they were just both devastated. Not for 1 second did David ever doubt her story. He had no reason to. She was just so sincere. She was so devastated that her children had gone. They both were. So they just figured that the kids had been snatched, like she said. The next day, the word got out, news spread, and everyone was rightly so petrified. For everyone's safety, for their own safety, for the children's safety, the community and the authorities searched for these boys for 9 days. They dedicated all their time, all their effort in just trying to reunite this family. Everyone thought that Susan was this loving mother that doted on her children. She was only 23, she'd not long since left school, in which she was a high achiever and was voted the friendliest girl by her classmates. No one had any reason to doubt Susan's story. The police would later find out, though, that Susan had actually said to one of her friends, "I wonder what life would be like if I didn't have any kids." So there's this nationwide search going on for these boys. They have helicopters, they have dogs, they have just so many bodies searching the ground, searching woods, bodies of water. They just searched everywhere. They had the mounted police. They did earth searches. People were driving around in their car, searching grassy and wooded areas on foot, and the efforts were just huge. The police at the same time were also investigating the family too. Now, a lot of crimes that are committed, abductions and things like that, are usually a family member, unfortunately. I know it's sad to say that, but it normally is the case. So it's standard practice in crimes of this nature to look into the family. So they questioned both parents, and Susan just basically sticks to the story that this African-American man basically kidnapped her children. She describes him, but it's a very generic description that she gives of a typical African-American man. She stated that he was a black male, medium build, with dark hair, dark eyes, and around 30 to 40 years old. He was 5'9" to 6 foot and 175 pounds approximately. So really, that's not much to go on. There's no distinguishing features, there's no marks, there's no nothing. And that very vague description kind of describes pretty much half of the people that were living there at the time. How they made a composite sketch, but how could they possibly look into people off that sketch when it pretty much looks like most people that live there? Because of that, they did eventually take it off air because it was just pretty much useless. They couldn't base their investigation off that. Even though that was a bust, of course they carried on looking for the boys. They had been snatched from the mother. The mother was right there and they were taken. And they were just doing everything that they could. They put out missing posters. They put out photos everywhere. And they even put up these yellow ribbons for the boys. And everyone was just really worried. Especially since this town, as I said, was very small. It was normally very quiet and usually nothing ever happened there. So for them, it was quite a shock, really. David and Susan did a public appeal for their sons to be returned home.
I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't do anything but think about them. And I just want to hug them so bad.
On the second day of the investigation, Susan and David took a polygraph test, which Susan failed, and that just raised doubts about her story. Some people at this point were already beginning to doubt her, and that kind of just amplified it. Of course, these tests aren't 100%. As you know, a polygraph, it can't be used in court or anything like that because it isn't 100% accurate, but it does have a gauge of how nervous someone is. So it meant that maybe she was hiding something. The police decided that they were going to confront her, and quite fiercely as well. They wanted to see if they came at her very hard to see whether she broke down and told them anything. She didn't let them in on a secret, and she just stuck to her story. There were hundreds of leads coming in every day. Police were out day and night trying to sort through it all, just trying to find these poor boys. Whilst all this was going on, David and Susan were staying at Susan's parents' house so that they could be together and they could support each other through these horrifying and terrifying times. On day 3, they thought they had a breakthrough in the case. Someone had actually seen Susan's car in North Carolina, but as it turned out, it was a car similar to hers, but it wasn't actually hers, and so that was a bust. Police sent divers into the lake where Susan had told them that this man had taken the kids. He told her to go get out and he drove off. So they sent the divers in, searching the depths of the water. They searched from the edges to around about 100 meters in and they found nothing. Her house was searched by the FBI, which also turned up nothing. A week passes by and the boy's parents go back on TV. I really do think that the police thought she was hiding something because they interviewed her daily and they began to notice that because of that, some of the things she was saying didn't really add up. As I said before, she claimed that she went to Walmart. Now, Walmart have these greeters. The police went and spoke to them and the ones that were on shift that night, and they didn't remember seeing her whatsoever. Again, it was a small town, so people tend to recognize people, and not many people would be going in and out, and so they would have known if they'd have seen her, and they didn't. Not only that, the friend that she was going to see that night, that she was traveling all that way to go and see, that she never ended up making it to, she wasn't actually in. She wasn't at home at all. Alright, maybe she didn't know that. Maybe she not rang and just planned on going up there. You could say that. Regardless of that, suspicions of her were growing internationally as well. Susan would say things like, I loved them, I really did, which of course is past tense. And why was she referring to her children in past tense unless she knew something that nobody else did? Were these children even still alive? A lot of people had one question on their mind: did the mum do it? The biggest breakthrough in the case was the description of a carjacking location. She claimed that a traffic light had turned red, causing her to stop in an otherwise empty intersection. It was determined, though, that the light wouldn't have actually turned red unless a vehicle was present on that intersecting road. So this conflicted with the statement she had given, that she didn't see any other cars when the carjacking took place. On the 9th day of the boys actually being missing, David and Susan appeared on 3 of the biggest morning news shows in the US. It was basically to defend themselves as well as pleading for their son's return.
It hurts to know that that I would be accused or even thought that I would ever do anything to harm my children.
Just hours after this appearance, Susan went and met with police in this recreation room where she just broke down. That was on the 4th of November in 1994, and she begged the sheriff that was interviewing her for his gun. She went on to say that in fact her children were not alright. She fell to the floor, sobbing hysterically, claiming that her children and her car were at the bottom of that lake. Police sent divers in, and again they went further this time. They went 122 meters in, and that is where they found Susan's car. So they had previously only gone in 100 meters just as a generalized search area, and literally if they'd have gone 22 more meters they would have found it. This bit researching it was awful because as the divers go down with the flashlight, the water is murky, so that is why they have to use it. And they just see this little hand pressed up against the car window, and that is just devastating. They recovered Susan's car from the bottom of the lake, along with the bodies of Michael and Alex that were still strapped inside their car seats. They got her to do a written confession, which in it she wrote that she was suicidal that night and was living in a veil of tears. She had planned to kill herself that night and apparently didn't want her children to live on without their mother, and so she decided to take them with her. She drove around for an hour that fateful night before turning into the lane that led to that lake. She drove onto the boat ramp, allowed her car to roll a bit before she put the brakes on and stopped. She sat there, she contemplated a little bit, and then she did it again. She allowed the car to roll a little bit and then stopped once more. She decided to think about it one more time. She then got out of the car, released the brake, and watched as the car rolled off into the lake with her 2 little boys in the back seat. David was informed of what really had happened to his children, and of course he was absolutely heartbroken. The bodies of the boys were still strapped inside the car seats, and they were grossly deformed because they'd been in the water for 10 days now. So many people came in for these beautiful little boys' funeral. The yellow ribbons that they had put out in the hopes of finding them were then replaced with blue and white ones in remembrance, and people left messages They left photos, there were balloons everywhere, and they put flowers all at the boat ramp where they had gone into the water as like a shrine to them. Everyone felt betrayed by Susan because so many people had put the time and their effort into looking for her children. They were emotionally involved in this tragic story, and to find out that it wasn't even true, that she had in fact murdered her own children. Obviously the black community in the town felt betrayed as well because she had blamed an African American man for kidnapping her kids. And that kind of put a strain on the white community and the black community because it made them feel really awkward. And it had this kind of unspoken tension between them. And it was all because of Susan's lies. So Susan quickly went from this woman who had one of the most horrific things happen to her, children snatched from right in front of her, where she had gained all of this sympathy because of it, to the most hated woman in America. A news reporter went on to state that the whole country was ready to lynch her and just couldn't understand how she could have done it. Susan was of course arrested. Her mother and stepfather went on to remortgage their house to get the best legal aid that specialised in the death penalty. They made sure that they got together a jury that had no biases. They selected the jury of 9 men, 3 women, 4 of which were black. So it was a really fair jury for her trial. The jury members were held in a hotel, they were held in isolation over the entire course of the trial to just make it as fair as they could so that there weren't any biases. In July of 1995, her trial begins. Now with death penalty trials, there are usually kind of 2 of them. So the initial one is to clarify as to whether the person is guilty or not guilty. And then if found guilty, they have another trial to see whether they are going to get the death penalty or whether they are not. So Susan had confessed, so the first trial was going to go as expected. She was going to be found guilty. Towards the second trial though, the defence pretty much said that the death penalty would give Susan what she wanted. She wanted to take her own life, and instead she should be left to suffer in jail. Prosecution led with their believed motive, that Susan actually murdered her children so she could start a new life with her then ex-boyfriend Tom Findlay. As I said, he was a very desirable man. He was wealthy, and it was thought, by them at least, that she wanted in on that life and she wanted him back, and that is why she did it. Now, a couple of weeks before she actually committed these murders, Tom had actually sent her a letter as to why they weren't suited together, and in this letter he actually referenced her children as being one of the reasons why. Now, it's not really known why they did this because they didn't really need to give a motive. She confessed, and in doing that it allowed the defence to kind of counter it with their own motive. So in the defence's opening statement, they said that she was deeply troubled and suffered from severe depression. They told the jury, this is not a case about evil. This case is about despair and sadness. The defence went on to get a psychiatrist to look at her, which the prosecution couldn't do, only the defence could do that, and they diagnosed her with dependent personality disorder and major depression, which once more supported their motive. The defence's theory of the case was that Susan drove to the edge of the lake to kill herself and her 2 sons, like she claimed, but then her body just blew itself out of the car. That she was suicidal, and that was actually backed up by her past, as you already know. The thing was though, she never drove into that lake. You know, if she'd driven in and then changed her mind, like, as the water's filling in, she thinks, oh my god, I don't want to do this, and then gets out, maybe it would have been more plausible, but she didn't. She literally stood there and pulled the brake off of her car and let it roll in. She watched as the children that were strapped in the car, making it impossible for them to get out themselves, and they were only kids anyway, they were young, so they would have struggled anyway. So there was pretty much no way of them to be able to get out themselves. She understood what she did was wrong because she tried to cover it up. She tried to lie and pretend that somebody had kidnapped her kids. She never told the police that she killed her children, and she lied about it for over a week. It only took 2.5 hours for the jury to convict her of 2 counts of murder for murdering her 2 little boys. During the penalty phase, Tommy Pope, who was the lead prosecutor in the case, argued passionately in favour of sentencing her for the death penalty. He actually made a video recreating the scene that would have unfolded to the people in court, so they could actually visualize it, like fully visualize it. And the court watched as the car slowly sank. They also had a camera in the back where the boys would have been, so kind of as if it was from their point of view. And it took a whole 6 minutes for that camera to be engulfed fully in water. Those boys were sat in that car, strapped in their car seats, as it filled with water for 6 minutes whilst they just waited for their death. 6 minutes, Susan stood there watching that car as it sank. At any point, she could have jumped in and saved her 2 boys, but she didn't. She just watched as it bobbed and swayed and the water engulfed it. David Smith actually testified against Susan, and through his testimony, he pretty much brought the boys back to life. He told everyone about taking them to the park, how much they enjoyed it, all the things that he had done with them, and then having him relive their deaths. It really brought an emotional side to the prosecution, and the courtroom was in tears, including Susan and even including the judge when he left the room. As Susan left the courtroom, she whispered to David that she was sorry. The defense put forward their own emotional testimony on behalf of Susan, starting with her stepfather's sexual abuse, which he literally admitted to right there and then in front of everyone. On the 28th of July 1995, after deliberating for 2.5 hours, the jury did ultimately vote against the death penalty. She will be liable for parole in November of 2024 after serving 30 years in prison, although it is believed that she will not get it. Whether that is the case, I guess we will find out in 3 years. Now, I've always had a level of sympathy for people who suffer from mental health issues and commit these terrible crimes, but with Susan it was kind of a bit different. Yes, she did suffer and she did have depression, but there's no denying that she literally stood there and watched as her kids were going down, as the car sank, as it began filling with water. How terrified those boys must have been, not even knowing what was going on. Then she tried to hide a children's murder by making up a story that a member of the black community had kidnapped them. And if she hadn't have been caught, like all the discrepancies that people were noticing and the things that she was slipping up on, she probably wouldn't have ever told anyone what had happened. This case is just heart-wrenching. It's so sad, and my heart breaks for those poor little boys that just wouldn't have had a clue what was going on, and David and all of their family who was just heartbroken at what happened to them. But yeah, that's the end of the case. Give me a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the video and subscribe to my channel for similar content. Anyway guys, that's all I have today on the case of Susan Smith. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.